It's an absolute pleasure to introduce Sandro Minella, Scientific Coordinator of the Barolo Barbaresco Academy and Langhe Wine School, which is officially run under the umbrella of the Consortium Barolo Barbaresco. Sandro Minella is a wine educator working with several major trade organizations in Piedmont, leading their events in Italy and worldwide. Well, I'd also like to introduce Andrea Ferrero, the director of the Consortium Barolo Barbaresco, who is with us today to introduce the session. Thank you both very much for your time and for being with us today. Andrea, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for this connection, and good afternoon to everyone. So on behalf of the consortium, of course, the board, the president, Mr. Ascheri, and all the wineries, we are very proud to be here today for this great opportunity in order to let you know what we are doing for the promotion of our appellation with the format of the Barolo Barbaresco Academy Langhe Wine School. So our consortium was born in 1934, so we have a long history, but not time today to explain this. So thank you again, thank you, Sandro, and enjoy the seminar. I apologize, but I can't stay with us until the end because I have another meeting, but so we probably will be another occasion. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrea.
So, Sandro.
Yeah. So first of all, it's my great honor to be in this meeting with wine professionals from, I guess, different parts of the world. Are you all from England right now, or other parts of the world too? Okay. Alan, hey, nice to see you. A long time. So, well, Alan's book on Barolo is one of those books that made me feel that I had to, to do something not just about the land that I love, not as big as it did with that beautiful book, but I'm trying my best to. So basically, we have like 45 minutes, and then the questions at the end. So we'll not do very long introductions. The idea today is to show you a little bit what the Barolo Barbaresco Academy Langhe Wine School is, and give you a little overview of what we do in our three-day program of the Academy. It's based on 2 levels. The next level 1 will be in January 24. The next level 2 probably on 25. We don't do the level 2 every year. But at the same time, not just an overview of what the Academy is, but also an overview of Barolo and Barbaresco. When we were still offline with Andrea and other, we were talking about the fact that sometimes we go to very specific details when we talk about the MGA, the cru, the single vineyards, or other aspects of these wines. And sometimes it's nice to step back for a moment and see everything from a larger perspective, from a larger point of view, and to put everything in the right perspective, both historical situation or recent subjects that are in the discussion in these days. So I will share my screen, but you also have the present. I don't know if you have it already, but we'll be happy to share with you the PDF of the presentation. Okay, so the next level 1 will be at the end of January, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, just before Grandi Langhe, which will be in Turin on the 29th and 30th. So in 5 days, you can do the Academy and then attend the big event in Turin. It will be the 3rd year now that was held in Turin. The first level of the Academy is divided in 3 days. First day, I will be the kind of a tutor, so I'll be there all the 3 days to help the students for practical needs. But I will also lead the first module on history and geographical setting of the area and an overview of the appellation, because we believe that is talking about clones and soils and enological facts is important, but it's also important for a land like this where wine is part of our culture, a deep part of our culture, it's also important to consider the human factors. Then the second part in the afternoon is going to be with Edmondo Bonelli, geologist and natural scientist, that will explain about the natural factors, so mainly soil and climate, of course, with a very interesting tasting where we will taste 4 different Nebbiolo that are same clone, same age of the vine, same altitude, exposure to the sun, same everything, except the soil in which they are grown, and they're vinified in exactly the same way. It's micro-vinification made in a laboratory, so that to emphasize, to isolate as much as possible all the other components and analyze what's the effect of the soil itself into wine, into Nebbiolo specifically. Second day, viticulture and enology. Viticulture with Edoardo Monticelli, professor at the Enology School of Alba, will tell us about the evolution of and the specific characteristics of the viticulture and agronomy in the Langhe. Then with famous enologist Vincenzo Gerbi, one of the most famous Italian enologists that works for the university here in Turin. Again, we'll analyze the history and the new trends and the new challenges of from the enological point of view. So after the grapes are in the cellar. And then a final part where we talk about the future trends, opportunity, threats of the wines of the Langhe in particular, and both with Monticelli and Gerbi, we will do specific tastings that will focus on different aspects of the wines. The last day will basically everything we have learned in the first 2 days, we'll see it in practice with a beautiful tour led by me and Edmondo Bonelli of the Barolo and Barbaresco area, with the idea of helping you to be able to read the landscape. If you know the language in which the landscape is talking to us, really is not just about beautiful pictures and views, but understanding why a vineyard is there instead of here. It's very it can really tell you a lot more that you can ever say in a book. And then of course the final part, the thread line, the red line, let's say, that will inform all the modules, all the teachers, is exactly this strong connection between human and natural factors. So natural factors, great varieties, humans aspects, also some aspects that don't seem to be directly connected to winemaking, such as the history of our nation, but for a place like Barolo and Barbaresco that actually really so in these castles, the birth of Italy, it's also very, very important to understand these factors and how they have a consequence on the wines of today. So let's start from that point. So we see how in the first half of the 19th century, sort of revolution in the winemaking, and not only winemaking, but agricultural methods, winemaking, and wine commerce really changed the history of Piemonte wines. We call this a sort of a magic triangle of Barolo. We don't have one single creator of Barolo. It was basically Barolo and the other wines of the area, basically these 3 castles that were the King Charles Albert, his prime minister Camillo Benso, and the Marquis of Barolo, one of the richest families in the kingdom at that time, made this revolution. The revolution basically meant transforming the idea, the concept of everyday wines produced locally and consumed locally for the local market, transport and creating wines for the first time, wines that could compete in the world wine business at that time, specifically with Bordeaux wines, and be exported all over the world. Of course, it's not the king and the prime minister and the marquis themselves that really made the wine. They had, especially the Camillo Benso and King Carlo-Alberto, the substantial help of a French wine merchant, Louis Houdard, and most of all, Francesco Staglieno, an enologist that really made a new approach on winemaking, and also not only worked for this estate, but he really spread his knowledge among the local producers. And he's the real one, the real mastermind behind this big revolution in the winemaking of the Langhe. Just a few years later, about 50 years later, the birth of Barbaresco. In this case, we can say we have a specific place and a father of this wine that was Domizio Cavazza, the first dean, the first director of the Enology School of Alba. He was based in Barbaresco, and in 1894 he created the Cantina Sociale del Barbaresco, trying to express the potential that could be produced in the area of Barolo, also in Barbaresco. And as a dean of the Enology School, he brings us into the next step. So basically, in our history, if we see from a larger perspective, between the 18th, 19th century is the local aristocracy that really changed and invested and changed in this revolution in the winemaking. At the end of the century, basically they passed this role to a couple of generations of wine merchants that were based mostly in the towns, Alba, Asti, Bra, etc. They were buying grapes from a number of farmers. Here we have some pictures of the what is today Piazza Ferrero in Alba. That was for many decades the main grape market, where you would see during the harvest time thousands. Look at this picture here. Thousands of carriages full of grapes that were sold to the market. So the situation was very different from what it is today. The large majority of the producers were based in the towns for a very simple reason. The railway was there. And so when it came to ship, not produce, but bottling and then shipping the wines, was much easier at that time to ship them through the train line. And so that was this model that worked until basically the first half of the 19th century. Also, another important role played by this generation of wine merchants was in the creation of the Scuola Enologica, Enology School in 1881. It created, this is taken from the foundation chart of the school, in order to free the farmers from centuries-long empiricism. We are in the years where winemaking starts to become a science. And this school played a big role in creating a critical mass of wine experts, vintners and wine experts in this region. But also the lobbying ability of these wine merchants was one of the elements that brought to the creation of the first law in Italy, first ever law on quality on fine wines, as we would call it today. Barolo, Barbaresco, and Brunello di Montalcino were the first wines to be included in this law. And this is also the time when the production area of Barolo and Barbaresco was delimited for the first time. In 1934, basically the same group of people created the consortium, of which Andrea is the director today, that was aimed to protect the appellation from frauds, but also to protect the image of this appellation. Another big important steps were some years later, 1966, when Italy introduced the DOC system, and then 1980, the DOCG system. Again, Barolo and Barbaresco were the first wine to be included in this list together with Brunello. This also gave a boost to the production in a very critical moment. So in a moment when, for different reasons, that model of few wine merchants and a large number of farmers started to change. The farmers didn't make enough money to survive, so they had two options: either go into Alba and work for Ferrero and make Nutella, not bad, but the other option was to, if they wanted to survive, to start not selling grapes for a very low price, but trying to sell wine and to obtain better profits. So the DOC and the DOCG gave a boost to this. This is just a quick overview of how the area of Barolo has changed. So basically, after 1933 and then 1966, in dark orange here, you have the extension of Barolo district more or less as it is today, and I never changed more. Barbaresco never changed at all, but we saw a very big growth of the surface dedicated to vineyards of Nebbiolo in the last year. So when the DOC started, we were talking about for Barolo 600 hectares. Now we're talking about more than 2,000. And more or less a similar thing happened in Barbaresco, more or less the same envelope, I would say, where you can see that the real boost started in the mid-90s, more or less, in the second part of the graph on the right, that's highlighted there. So we have to think that the area has not changed. What has, and it's also the woods have not, as we can see in this slide, is not the woods that have been replaced with vineyard, as some people say. Actually, the woods today the wooded area is larger than it was in the 1950s. What has changed is that all the other cultures and grape varieties, such as Barbera and Dolcetto, were prevalent until the early 90s, were substituted with Nebbiolo grapes for a large part, at least, for the change of market. Just to give you a little number, a little data that will help you put everything in the right perspective. Today, Barolo and Barbaresco are dominating the market, the magazines, the fairs and everything. But remember that the first year in which Nebbiolo grapes were we are talking about the Barolo district, okay, in which Nebbiolo grapes were paid per kilo more than Dolcetto grapes was 1993. Okay, so we're not talking about centuries ago. So what we have seen in the last years, it's a big change in the value of the land due to the big success of Barolo and Barbaresco, and of course Nebbiolo grapes. We can see it from two different perspectives. Here is the average value of a vineyard in Piedmont, in the whole region. As you can see, there's a constant growth. But if we consider this other graph, basically the orange bar refers to the vineyards of Barolo and Barbaresco. The blue bar of the average price of the vineyards. As you can see, the other vineyards of the rest of the region have grown, doubled more or less, but not that much. Barolo and Barbaresco, the value of the land in Barolo and Barbaresco is a factor of 10 in its growth, and not 2. So what we have seen in the last year is this big focus on the Nebiolo for Barolo and Barbaresco. Of course, we still strongly believe that, as you can tell from our name, Consorzio Tutela Barolo Barbaresco, yeah, but also Alba, Langhe, Dogliani. So we protect all the appellation, and in the Barolo Barbaresco Academy / Langhe Wine School, we will cover all the different appellations. So enough for the natural factors for today. Then, of course, if you have questions, we'll talk later. Of course, at the Academy, we go much deeper in this. But also, of course, very important, the natural factors. Well, with this, I think that this, if we are able, as we were saying before, to read the landscape, this picture alone would be enough. We could skip all the other slides because there's everything in this picture. First of all, the Alps on the background that create this unique climate in Piemonte, in the southern part of Piemonte. We are halfway between the Alps and the sea, but our climate is not alpine and it's not Mediterranean either. So we have something unique, something that cannot be, duplicated in any part of the world. Then the other element that also influences the climate. So in the background, you have the Alps, but as you can see, the Langhe, we have this parallel ridges of hills that also influence the air circulation, creating the great diversity of microclimate, we should better say mesoclimates, but of a small climatic zone that are an essential element to, if you want to understand the keyword of Barolo and Barbaresco and wines of the Langhe, in my opinion, which is diversity. It's hard to define the area with just a as a whole. We have to go more in details due to the diversity. And you can, the landscape, the picture tells about that diversity. Just look at the different shades of green. Maybe it depends also a little bit on your screen, but if you can see it wider on a wider screen, you can see there's more than 50 shades of green here. So depending on little difference in the soil composition, in the microclimate, and in the way also the vineyards are managed, you can see that even from the color of the leaves, that the growth and the life cycle of the vines can show important differences that then of course will come into the wine. Another picture that can show that more close. Here up front, you have on the first level here, we have a vineyard of Dolcetto. You can see that there is just a little trail in between the two parts of the vineyard, but obviously the vines are in a very different moment of their life cycle due to just a little difference in the sun exposure, probably a little bit in the soil composition too. So again, the picture that talks a lot about the diversity of the conditions. If we start from a large scale and then we zoom in, first of all, the soil, first element, soil. We are in this big basin of sedimentary rocks, whereas the rest of Piemonte, the Alps, are made of metamorphic volcanic rocks. And if the sedimentary rocks that came from an ancient seabed, here we have a sort of something to show you how the area evolved. So until 20 million years ago, the sediments were still on the bottom of the sea, on this sort of big gulf that was the continuation of what is today the Adriatic Sea, that came all the way up to Piemonte. And what happened, starting more or less around 20 million years ago, is that the African tectonic plate started to collide with the European plates in this way, in this direction. So the coastline, all those sediments were pushed up. The same forces that elevated the Alps also pushed up all this sector with the marine sediments that started to get out from the sea level. So the coastline started following this direction, started to move from southeast towards northwest. Of course, this is just a sort of a little example. We don't have such a precise Google map from 20 million years ago, but that's to give you the idea. So what happened is that all the layers that were horizontally layered, sedimented on the bottom of the sea, came up and were inclined in one direction. Imagine a pile of books that you incline in one direction. The books start to slip on one side, and you can start to see from above the back of the book, right? So here is the general map, but in the red circles you have more or less Barolo and Barbaresco area. If we zoom in, we see something very important. Many times I still read on the blogs or the websites of our producer, they say, oh, the soil of Barbaresco that are so different from Barolo. Well, it's actually not, the soil does not explain everything, because we have the exact same geological layer that goes from Barolo to Barbaresco. Just this northwest part of Barolo, we cannot find that in Barbaresco. We find it in Roero again. But you can see that it's just a continuation of the same geological layers. If we cut from up vertically the area, we can see the other important aspects that is fundamental if you want to understand the wines of the region. The fact that the profile of the hills is not a regular rolling hills, but we have this sawtooth profile where we clearly have a sequence of layers. So that explains why every 10, 100 meters, 100 yards, whatever, you walk through the vineyards, you see the soil composition that changes because we are crossing different layers. But also another important aspect, every side of the hill has the southeast side that is much steeper than the west part, northwest part. So here the water slips down more, the soils are shallow or cannot be deep and evoluted. Less water retention, of course, whereas on the other side, fresher condition, deeper soil, less erosion, and more fertile land. So again, refer to the picture that I was showing you before with the vineyard of Dolcetto. It's more or less this situation. So just a little change in that hill, and the vines grow in a totally different condition. Talking, of course, about soil, here we have a zoom in and more detailed map, like the one I have in my back here in my room, where again we can see that the same kind of soils that we have in Serralunga, where we get normally the more strong, more tannic Barolos, is exactly the same that we have in a good part of the Barbaresco region, whereas all the different types of Mars that we have in the central part of Barolo are exactly the same that we have in Barbaresco. Here is just a list of these are highlighted here are the soils that we find in both places that represents the majority of the area of Barolo and all the area of Barbaresco. The key point is the different composition of these soils. Basically, the different composition in terms of minerals first, but also sand, silt, and clay. Essential to understand the different characteristic of the grades in the different MGA or subzones or Barolo and Barbaresco. Here we have a quick example. You have the four main phenological phases from bud break, flowering, color change, and ripening, veraison and ripening. These are 5 examples taken from Masnaghetti books, but let's take the 2 more extreme. Where highlighted in blue, laminated Mars, meaning the ones that are richer in clay. As you can see, it's the first bud break. These are the days of the bud break from one place to another. Okay, so the shorter the bar, the earlier the time, the earlier the day of the year. So clay-rich Mars, bud break is the first, and the harvest time is the last. The opposite condition, the arenaria, sandstone. The sand is very, the porosity of sand gives a great drainage. Is the last place where they started bud break and the first that we pick. Here is a picture that shows you what happens in practical, not on a graph, but in reality. A vineyard on here to the right, where you can see there's a different composition in soil. The plants where the young vines were put at in the same day, all the plants were exactly the same where they were planted, but you can see after just a few weeks, or a few months because it was planted before, there's an obvious difference in the growth rates. And in the left, we have that's made by Edmondo Bonelli. We are in a greenhouse, so same light, same temperature, same amount of water given to all these different vines. The vines were exactly the same clone, same everything, planted in the same day, but the soil in each vase, in each vat, there is from a different part of Barolo region. You can see Ravera, Brunate, Parussi, etc. See how we are in spring, late spring here. Look at the difference in the growth of the vines, where the only variable is the soil there. But the other element, climate, again, let's start from the larger map and then zoom in. We can clearly see how, due to the shape of Piemonte and the geographical position, we have the hot and warm air that comes up from the right, from the valley of the Po River, from Milan, Pianura Padana. In the red circles are Barolo, Barbaresco, and Roero, and the cold, dry, so hot and wet and humid, cold and dry air that comes from southwest, from the Alps. If we zoom in, we can see that, again, the difference between Barolo and Barbaresco is not in the soil composition, but to a large part at least, but in this different exposure to the different air currents. But Barbaresco is open to the valley. When the sun goes down in Barbaresco, you still have the warm air in the evening that comes up and brings heat and humidity. Barolo is more exposed to the Alps. Barolo also is more far from the valley, so it has a more continental kind of climate compared to Barbaresco, being secluded, sort of protected by the hills of La Morra, Monforte, and Serralunga that create this unique micro climate. So just to give you an idea of the difference, if we have the same kind of vine with the same age and everything, same altitude and everything in Barolo and Barbaresco, we would normally, on average, of course, not all of them, but on average, we would expect to harvest in Barbaresco 1 week earlier than in Barolo, due to the different position of the two wine zones. And of course, if you go even, if you zoom in even more, you can see that, again, the great diversity of the different climates create this different situations. Here we have vineyards that are just near this cliff. So we are in between Monforte, Castiglione, and Falletto. And here the heat that is reflected by the cliffs there creates a different climatic condition on the vineyards that you have on one side and the other side of this slope. Of course, all this is very complicated, putting together all these informations. Fortunately, we have here in the Langhe the best chemical laboratory in the world. It's called Nebiolo. Nebiolo puts together all this information, the amount of water that it gets, the minerals, but also the operation of humans. So when it's pruned and how much manure we put on, or the canopy management, everything. So human factors and natural conditions come together in this map of the harvest times of in Barolo region. Obviously, we are waiting for Alessandro Masnaghetti to do the same for Barbaresco, but you can clearly see that we have, if you look at the details of this map, in blue it's very late harvest, dark blue, dark orange is the very early harvest, and the other conditions in between. You can see that sometimes we have vineyards that are facing in the same exposure to the sun, the same altitude, but like, for example, here we can take Ravera or other vineyards here in Serralunga, but being on a different part, not only different exposure and altitude, but just different parts. We can see how in the west part we receive the cold winds from the Alps. The very late harvest is mostly on this sector. We have a central part, the big amphitheater-shaped valley around Barolo, where the heat and the humidity remains more for a longer time, less diurnal shifts, temperature. There we have early to very early harvest time. Of course, one of the elements that we will talk about during the academy is how we are facing the changes in the climatic conditions. I don't have the time now to go deep in this very interesting subject, but here is a map of a graph, of the heat, rain of every year of the last 20 more or less, but together with the harvest time. Then there is a line made with dots that is the average harvest times. What you can see is that in the last year, the harvest has been anticipated of more or less 1 day, so almost nothing. But what we clearly see is that the red line, so the harvest time of each year, goes up and down very much, So it's not just a global tendency, but it's these up and downs that are probably the most interesting aspect to analyze of these last vintages and the changes. Of course, the time of harvest again is not depending on the climatic conditions solely. Of course, the climatic condition of the vintage before in 17 we had a very dry year that reflected on the production of 18, for example. But also, this is the natural factors that we cannot change, of course. But there's a number of human factors that explain, again, putting together human and natural aspects that can explain this different time of harvest, crucial for the quality of wines, of course. What has changed in these years? Lower yields per hectare. The treatments of the vine disease have changed a lot. In the past, when I was a child, I remember there in May and June, the leaves of the vines were completely blue, covered with copper. Today, if you see something like that, you wonder who the hell, put all that copper. That had a big influence on the photosynthesis and, of course, all the phenological phases. But also, the viticultural practices, putting manure in winter or in spring, for example, can have a strong effect on that. The choice of clones. In the 90s, we were looking still, colder vintages and the search for higher concentration, more color in Barolo. We put a lot of clones that were anticipating their harvest time. More accurate weather forecast, of course. In the past, you never know. Also today, they're not always accurate, but we have more accuracy. And so today we know in advance what's going to be in the next few days. We can decide to harvest a bit later, a bit earlier. And above all, changes in the socio-economic context. Again, putting together the history of Barolo with present time. In the past, where there were farmers selling grapes to the wine merchants. So there were farmers, not wine producers. They had cows, they had here was the room where we kept the cows in my house in those years. Cows, a cornfield, other things to do, other vegetables, other things. So the time of harvest was based not only on the weather and other conditions and the phenolic ripening, but only on the operation sometimes of the distribution of labor through the year. So, as we said before, Academy is about all the wines of the Langhe. Today, we cannot analyze all of them. We'll just a quick focus on Nebbiolo that will give you an idea of the approach that we have on all the analyzing all the grape varieties and the different appellations at the Academy. So, first of all, we put in the right context. Nebbiolo is not the main grape variety in Piemonte, as so many people think. It's actually the fourth, much less than, even less than Dolcetto. But of course, if we are talking about the Langhe, the situation is very different. 37% Nebbiolo, but as you can see, Dolcetto, that is not so considered in the market in these years, but it's still 27%, more, almost double as Barbera, way more famous in the Langhe. And then all the other grape variety that represent a good more than 20%. So Nebbiolo from the agricultural, viticultural, and then enological point of view that we'll analyze with Monticelli and Gerbi. Quick facts about Nebbiolo: demanding but resilient. It's a very strong and resilient grape variety. We are seeing that in the last year with these changes in climate. Nebbiolo is responding much better than Barbera and Dolcetto, for example, to the different conditions. But of course, at the same time, adapting means to change its characteristics. So the grape, what is in the grapes, it's in the berry at the end of the season, can change a lot too. We analyze how the amount and the specific characteristic of the soil can impact the Nebbiolo. Another characteristic that also explain why Nebbiolo is so terroir driven, as we say, it buds earlier, ripens late. More than other grape varieties, it's under the sun or under the weather for a longer time. So it expresses more, not only the location of the vineyard, but also the vintage. It suffers sudden temperature changes, but changes between day and night, as we are experiencing in this September, hot during the day, cold at night, are crucial for one of the most important aspects of the Nebbiolo and the quality of the wines, which is the phenolic ripening. Then, of course, some words about the clones. In the past, we thought, and the mantra was, Nebbiolo, it has 3 clones: Rosé, Lampia, Miquette. Then we found out that Rosé is not Nebbiolo, but it's so historically used to make Barolo and Barbaresco that it's still allowed. Lampia, the main grape, the main clone, the main variety. And then we thought that Miquette was another clone. It's not. It's a Lampia with a virus. So after that, we developed Miquette clone derived from Miquette, but free from virus. And all the new clones are actually derived basically from that one. When I was talking about the 1990s, where we were searching for more concentration, more color, more concentration, and earlier harvest time, most people planted Miquette or other clones derived from Miquette because of, as you can see from the picture, more smaller bunches, more concentration of sugar, color, and everything. We'll see for the future, and we strongly believe that maintaining biodiversity, not only within the Nebbiolo, but all the different grape varieties we have in the Langhe, which is really huge biodiversity, is fundamental to protect that. And in Grinzane, we have, at the feet of the castle of Grinzane, we have this collection vineyard with more than 500 grape varieties and clones that are preserved there and studied, of course, by the university. Talking about the enological part, so after the grapes are in the cellar, key factors of the modern, of course, with the Gerbi, we'll again go back to the time of Francesco Staglieno and Cavour, and how in enological point of view, from an enological point of view, the things have changed. And of course, the key factors of the recent trends in Nebbiolo modern enology. Great knowledge, so knowing exactly what we have in the berries, it's fundamental to explain what we have in the wine. It seems obvious, but it's not. It's in practical terms because it's hard to understand all these little details. Phenolic ripeness, everybody checks the phenolic ripeness today, not so 20 years ago, where the pH and sugar were the main factor for deciding the time of harvest. Autochthonous yeast selection, so not only using selected yeast bought in the market, but producing autochthonous yeast selection. The maceration and oxygen management during the harvest, the fermentation and maceration, of course. A key factor, of course, in the past we were talking about small barrels, large barrels. It seemed that all the question was about, short maceration, the small barrels, long maceration, large barrels, modern and traditional. This is something that belongs to the past. Today, we decide all these things, and same winery can use different methods based on sometimes not even a single vineyard, but a single plot of the vineyard can be treated in different way. With Gerbi, we'll also analyze this very interesting table in which we compare Barbaresco from 1894, the analytics of Barbaresco 1894, 1990, 2000, to see what has changed in time. And we can see, how the alcohol has increased, the total acidity has gone down, more intense color, but the same structure, so the same dry net extract. Of course, we covered during the Barolo Barbaresco Academy all the appellations, and of course all the appellations of Nebbiolo. Just going quickly here, so how the Langhe Nebbiolo and how Nebbiolo plays the leading role in the Langhe DOC appellation. Of course, the specific characteristic and the differences between Langhe Nebbiolo and Nebbiolo d'Alba, which are not always so obvious even for us sometimes. And then, of course, an overview of the appellations of Barolo and Barbaresco. I'm not, you know a lot about this already, so I'm not discussing that right now. And, seeing all the differences between them, but also understanding how we have to be clear when we communicate about what an MGA or geographical unit of Barolo or Barbaresco is. Always remembering that the quality controls, the time of aging, all the process is exactly the same for a Barolo that is a blend of different vineyards or different MGAs, or Barolo or Barbaresco from a single MGA. So it's just two different approaches. It's not necessarily or automatically a higher quality in an MGA. It's a consequence of the choices of the producers, of course. But in terms of the production control of the controls of the production, they are absolutely on the same quality level. And of course, a little and a final, then I will end my speech for today, and I'm open to your questions. Of course, we will go through the history of these MGAs to not only understanding what they are today, you know that they were established officially in 2007 for Barbaresco, 2010 for Barolo, but the history started longer time ago. The first works at the end of the 18th century, where some vineyards were selected in Barolo and Barbaresco as vineyards with peculiar characteristics. Some of them are still the ones that we know today, with their names came from the tradition. So it's not a specifically distinct, the distinction of each MGA is not based on the soil composition or scientific, let's say, approach to the zoning, but it comes from the local tradition. So the vineyards were called after the family that lived there, or characteristic of the place. Like, for example, Boschetti means little woods. That's obvious why. Then Domizio Cavazza, the first dean of the winery, of the enology school, and the creator of Barbaresco, that of course explored more and analyzed more the area of Barbaresco and starting to define the vineyards. Then the 1960s, the moment when, thanks to Luigi Veronelli, famous Italian wine journalist, wine writer, some producers started to, for the first time, to bottle Barolos and Barbaresco with putting the name of the vineyard, of the single vineyard, on the label. I've taken these dates, these years from Masnaghetti books. There are some questions about who exactly was the first, was not so clear, also because at that time we didn't have the official zoning. So basically the producers before the DOC could pretty much write whatever they wanted as a name on the label. The first big step in the 1970s with Renato Ratti and his famous maps of Barolo and Barbaresco. Quite interesting to consider that he proposed a distinction of quality, a classification of quality that has never been used after him. It was based on the price of the grapes on the market. So again, connecting history and wine. When those grapes were sold at the market, there was the official price of the market that determined the quality of the grapes. Except that, of course, this is just a partial classification, because not all the grapes were sold on the market. Then 1990s, Slow Food for the first time covered and mapped the entire area and not just the most important crus, most important vineyards, and then officially 2007 and 2010 for the appellation. Just to last two slide. I don't want to use your precious times more. So today it refers to a couple of years ago, so it's more or less the same on average, of course, because every vintage we can have different levels of production, of course. When we talk about Barolo, more or less 50% of the Barolo you have on the market is just Barolo, so from multiple MGAs. 40% is Barolo with the name of an MGA from a single MGA. 10% Barolo del Comune, so when you have a Barolo made with grapes from different MGAs, but all these MGAs are in the same village, in the same town. Some curiosities: 90% of the producer have at least one Barolo MGA in their portfolio, an average of 2 per winery. The smallest is Bricco Rocche, Castiglione Falletto. The largest, not Bussia, as many think, but Bricco San Pietro. Barbaresco, a bit more than half of Barbaresco is sold as an MGA, 53% on average. Again, almost all the producers have at least one of them in their portfolio. The smallest is Rabayabas in Barbaresco, the largest one, Canova in Neibe. So I will thank you for your attention. Of course, it was a bit hard to cover 3 days and 45 minutes, so 15 minutes per day. But I hope this gave you an idea of the approach that we have in this 3-day program of the Academy, and also maybe help you to, sometimes, as we were saying before, step back from the very fine details that we learn and talk about and write about every day, and sometimes get a general view of the situation, and sometimes that can help understand some phenomenon. So when I still see, people writing about, for example, the war between modernists and traditionalists, okay, that was something that happened. Some families split because of that, but let's put it in the right context, in the right years. Today, it's really impossible, in my opinion, to define a winery as just traditionalist or modernist. There's plenty of little techniques and things that we do in a winery and tools that we use that can be either modern or traditional. It's impossible to say. And today the focus is absolutely about the understanding the grapes, their terroir, and trying to get the best out of that. So thank you so much for your attention, and now I'm free for open to all your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandro. Yes, there's a lot of detail there, and I'm sure once we've got your presentation, people will be able to go through that in the leisure.
You didn't have to take notes of everything.
There's a few questions. Wink has got a couple of questions, so I don't know if you just want to step in quickly with those, Wink.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for an excellent presentation, and for
thank you so much.
Managing to go through 3 days so quickly is quite a feat. So I had a historical question. I was interested in the timing of when the wine school was founded and whether there was a link with phylloxera.
Absolutely. Phylloxera, mildew, and all the diseases that came more or less all over Europe in those years. And we have this historical combination in which Pasteur described the fermentation, and wine starts to become a science. At the same time, the disease that come, and after also the importance of the wine business for that time and in this region, of course, many efforts were put on studying, with the University of Turin of that time, the Academy of Agriculture of that time. But then all these studies had to be transferred to the people. It's not normally some of them, yes, Domizio Cavazza was actually making wine, but I don't think it was actually, pressing with his feet. So it was the farmers that and the wine people that actually made the wine that had to be informed, that had to be updated with the new findings in science, in viticulture and enology. So it was like a conveyor belt of the information to the farmers and from the farmers to the university. Also, one of the reasons was to help fight phylloxera and the other diseases. Quite interesting that today the school program is a high school. Okay, so they start at 14 and it's 6 years. But when they started, it was 1 year. Again, consider that most of them were farmers. A boy of a farmer at the time, only guys at the beginning. A boy in a poor family of farmers that wastes 6 years of his life in the school. No, 1 was enough. But at least it was a beginning, to transfer this information and to, as they said in the charts of the foundation of that school, to free those farmers from empiricism. So actually, right. You're totally right with your observation.
Yeah, thank you. My other question, which I'm not sure whether it came through on the chat because it disappeared on mine, but was completely different and was related to climate change and harvest dates. You showed us a list of sectors, sure, and whether they were early, mid, or late harvest.
Sure.
And I'm wondering whether, with the change in harvest dates overall becoming earlier in the year, whether the sectors have sort of remained the same.
Well, I mean, the difference between them. So the map shows the average time, and then days earlier, there's days later. So the difference between them remains more or less the same. What has changed is that the blue parts of that map, let's bring the map back for a moment. It's quite interesting, I think. I go back quickly. So the blue zones in the past were not considered particularly good vineyards. For example, one of them is Ravera. Ravera, the name Ravera comes from a forest of oak trees, so not a vineyard. So let's go back. Okay. So the historical crew, let's call them crew, it's easier, were those where the climatic conditions were anticipating on average, of course, anticipating a little bit. In the past, where with less accurate forecast, with more, a simple technique and technology, it was crucial to harvest before the big rains in October and November and the cold weather, right? So with the development of both agricultural methods, management of the vineyards, and work in the winery, we are able to obtain much better results in the areas that once were considered too late harvest for being a safe place to put Nebbiolo. Let's put it this way. Ravera is one of those examples. Now, these areas, when we have in the last years, we have hotter vintages, they have become some of the most interesting ones. Whereas your question about the diseases, the fungal diseases, for example, is mostly on the bottom of the valley where the humidity and the fogs are most of the time. It's still a challenge. Of course, it was not last year when it didn't rain the whole year, but the humidity and as a consequence, all the fungal cryptogamic diseases is still a problem. This year, May and June, we had to work a lot to fight this kind of diseases. This also explains why in this area sometimes being certified organic can be more challenging than other parts that are parts of the other wine regions in the world. Other questions?
I think you've just covered Keith's question, because he was asking about how severe the challenges of cryptogamic diseases are, and I think you did answer that question. Is that okay, Keith?
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Now,
in Bordeaux, the growers had to have counselling this year. It was so bad.
Yeah. So yeah, one thing that talking about this subject, I think that I understand the point of view of a wine writer that when a new vintage comes out on the market, we are somehow pressed by our readers to say something about that vintage. When we talk about Barolo and Barbaresco, I would say more for Barolo due to the higher diversity that we have, but also Barbaresco. It's one of the areas of the wine regions in the world where it's sometimes hard to define a vintage in a generic and more simple way. In other places, think about Bordeaux, for example. Of course, there's the difference between different parts of Bordeaux, but the global weather conditions in the area are not hugely, they are different, but not hugely different. In Barolo, it can be totally different thing in this vineyard and just across the corner. I remember one year in July, there's this big jazz festival in Monforte. I was living there in Monforte, and in the square on the bottom of the village, it was so hot and humid. It was unbearable almost, it was crazy. We went up to the top of the village, like 550 meters above. It was cold, windy, and there was I can't remember it was a pianist playing solo. He had to wear those gloves without fingers. I don't know how he called them, because it was so cold, incredible. And people were trying to stick together, just to protect from the wind. So we can move, we can put a jacket, the vines cannot, they stay there. And so my suggestion is always to be cautious to give a general, unless it's something like totally extraordinary for the entire region, but location in the real estate business, they say location, location, location. We can use the same for Barolo here. So the Barolo and Barbaresco, yes, but where? I give you another quick example. 2014, one of the rainiest summer and cold and rainiest summer that we remember, and it rained like 22 days in July. Normally it's 2. So that year, the amount of rain in Barolo and Barbaresco, okay, the difference was 30% less in Barbaresco, and 30% is a lot, but it was an average, because from the driest part of Barbaresco to the rainiest part of Barolo, the difference was 60%. So when we talk about Barolo 14, Barbaresco 14, we're talking about 2 different vintages in the same year, but 2 different vintages. Okay, so and we are 15 minutes. For the locals, 10 minutes drive. For other people, 20 minutes. But we are so close, and the differences can be really huge.
Thank you, Sandro. Over to you, Michelle.
Well, my question was answered, so
Okay.
I got the percentage of production of Nebbiolo in one of the slides. So I don't know if there was another question. Otherwise, I'm happy to wrap up the session.
No, I think that was all the questions. So yeah.
Okay. Well, Sandro, thank you so much. That was a very interesting,
Hope it was
presentation.
useful for you, first of all, and I hope to give you a little hint and a little taste for the Academy, and I hope to see you all possibly at the next edition of the Academy here in Alba. By the way, the first level, we will do it in at the Ampelion, which is where the consortium is located, and also where the Enology School of Alba is there, and the university. And then the second level will probably be in the castle of Grinzane Cavour. So will be Alba, because the first editions we did it in the castle of Grinzane, but Alba is much easier to reach with public transportation when they're not on strike. But easier to reach.
Thank you, Sandro. Well, I can highly recommend the Academy for Barolo and Barbaresco enthusiasts, and Alba, of course, which is home to truffles and Nutella, for those who didn't know. So you can sometimes walk through the town of Alba and
smell
the waft of Nutella.
Oh, today they're roasting the hazelnuts. Okay.
Yes. So thank you again, Sandro, and thank you everybody for attending the session today.
Thank you so much. And if you have any questions about the Academy, you can refer to me or, well, Michelle, of course, me or Andrea, and for the practical questions to Virginia.